Was a splendid session. Imagining having the opening towards the printer, the professional printer in the studio, a homage to the persons we don't often see or see the name of even. And we had this extremist etcher in his extreme world that is so central to this seminar. And we also had Sarah Suzuki, who is in the middle of also the printed expanded field, really expanded. So I'm really looking forward to what we're going to talk about now. So please come up and we'll sit over here. We'll arrange a little bit and then we'll start. So.
Oh, we should. I was saying, I think Andrew and I have the most height disparity of any panel, probably.
Well, it's like a silent movie scene. That's okay. All right. Now, sometimes you're very lucky being a moderator, you know, when you have people like you. So thank you. Thank you very much. Very central to the theme of this seminar is, of course, the collective workshop. And I think we maybe should start there. You know, all those professional people working for the artists, or who are themselves artists and printers, you know. So what are kind of the moral guidelines here? How often do, as you very beautifully explained, the collaborative dimension of the works of art? I mean, these artists who are famous in their own right, coming to a workshop like you have, they will develop something that they couldn't have dreamt up themselves, you know? This is something new. That is a combination of knowledge and experience, etc. So...
Well, may I say that it doesn't always work out.
Luckily.
And on many levels. Not always is our studio and our printers going to mesh perfectly in create a magical kind of collaborative situation. Artists come in when they first visit. We spend probably a day and a half looking at work that's been produced at the studio by other artists. Mm-hmm. We keep a complete archive of everything that we have produced. Yeah. And that's a very important first experience. And then the artist presents their work to the staff and over lunch. Every day I buy lunch when an artist is in residence, and every day the printers and the artists and the rest of the staff eat with the artist. Take them on visits, in case of Christian Markley, out to find cassette tapes at thrift stores. And so there develops a rapport between the artists, and they experiment in a lot of different directions, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. Okay. Something is isn't realized, and we don't move forward with it. Or in some cases, they start something, and we can't quite figure out what direction we're going to go, and they may come back to it a year later. Or Alison Schatz started a whole body of work with us and abandoned it, and then called me up 3 years later and wanted to move forward.
Is it always the artist who has the final decision of if it's going to be done or not?
Well, no. You know, I stay out of the studio. I'm not a printer. I'm not an artist. I come in 2 or 3 times a day. I usually take the artist out to dinner and chat about the project. And I have to confess that there is a moment when I have to be a realist and say, this is just not the best work from the artist that we're going to move forward with. I remember at a seminar once, Red Groom said, you know, if you're going to make a print, it ought to be something really wonderful, because you're going to make more than one of them. So don't make something that's bad. And so I think there is an assessment, and it's obviously between us, and I have to make a decision also in terms of cost of production versus market.
Yeah. Then we're coming to my first question. And that is, there are different traditions in Europe and probably in the United States as well about is the professional printer in these types of collaboration, is his or her signature on the print?
No, but there's a chop mark for the
Okay.
studio and sometimes the chop of the individual printer that's part of the process. We copyright each one. We do a full documentation sheet that accompanies every project that outlines every single person from the accountant to the editor to the curator that's involved in the project. And it also spells out exactly the materials that are used. So when a Liechtenstein wax type comes back into the studio because somebody left it in the frame on a tarmac as they were shipping it, we know exactly what were the materials that were used that we can maybe sometimes help with the conservation of the work. So,
Okay. Maybe there are different opinions about, or ideas about this theme in a way, because it's rather central. I mean, the history of graphic art, you have different traditions, the delineavit, the drawer, or the pinksit, the painter who's made the painting or the drawing. And then you have the fekit, the guy who's made the graphic part of it. And, they have different, they're classified differently.
artists work in many different ways.
Yes, okay.
Some draw directly on the plate, some draw on mylar that's transferred photographically.
Yeah.
Some work with Photoshop and digital and produce a film that then the printers create the etching plate. It can vary.
Yeah.
Jia Ali, when he came from China, he didn't want any digital interface. He just wanted to draw directly on the plate, and that's what he did.
Okay. Are there opinions about this question in the audience here? Young people, for instance, what do you think?
Here's one.
Yeah? If you have questions you don't want to say in English, please say it in Norwegian and I'll translate. I'll try to.
Oh, it is on, sorry. My name is Gabrielle Perry. I am a first-year MA student, and my question is for Margaret. I was just wondering, how much freedom does the printer have in this collaboration with the artist to make artistic or creative suggestions? Or are they just there in a technical...
How much power does the printer have?
Exactly.
How much input?
Yeah.
Well, often it's the printer that comes up with a technique or a way of pursuing the idea. So it's a kind of back and forth between the printer and the artist. And often the printer will introduce, like for instance to Eva, she'd never made a soap ground, a lithograph, or an intaglio. So they spent several days just showing her what the results would be of those different techniques and looked at her drawings and make a suggestion of maybe how to solve a problem. We're often about solving problems.
Thanks.
So,
I mean, that was the same experience I had with my ceramics friend, Larry, in that I certainly couldn't have done any of it without him.
Oh.
And so I showed him samples of the kind of feeling that I wanted it to have, and he was able to get closer, but he knew exactly which clay was going to be stiff enough to go through that machine, what was not going to shrink too much. Those are things I never could have known. But then, I have to say, because he's my friend, he one time gave me a hint. And he was the one who told me that that engraving really didn't look very good on that plate. and all he said, don't you think that's a little bit much, Andrew? And I think one of the things that happens, I know that it's harder to do in your situation, but one of the things that happens so rarely for an artist is actually to have somebody give you a serious just nugget that you can work with. And I think be that frank about things.
In the afternoon, after we've proofed, often we'll pin up the proofs, and the printers and I come into the room and we look at the work and we discuss it. And we'll make suggestions about what the next proofing might entail or what a new technique might be. In some cases we start out working on an image in one technique and end up using something else. What we're working for is a moment when we all agree that we have absolutely what we're going to edition, and you all know that then the artist signs ATP, approval to print, or BAT. And that is the model by which the edition is produced. And the artist may leave, and the printers may work 3 or 4 months producing the edition, and the artist comes back. The curator then looks at each print, each impression, and compares it to that BAT and throws the one away that don't meet the standard that was agreed upon when that BAT or that ATP was signed.
I recently heard just a really great workshop story, if I may share. I don't know if people are familiar with the artist Doho Suh, a Korean artist who works with textile, really beautiful sculptor. And he was at Singapore Tyler Print Institute in Singapore, and he was trying to make these big editioned drawings of thread embedded in paper pulp. And kind of like Graphic Studio, this is a laboratory. They've probably looked very closely at a lot of things that you're doing. They'll try anything. And they spent weeks trying to figure out how to embed this beautiful colored thread into this wet pulp. And finally, after 3 weeks, a summer intern, a young woman who was a fashion design student, said to them, you know, I don't want to butt in, but I'm just wondering, why aren't you using this gelatin-backed thread that we use in fashion design? And they said, well, because we didn't know that existed. And that was the solution for that project, and it's a technique that he's continued to use in the last 1.5 years, that specific material. But as he said to me, it's something he never would have discovered if he hadn't been in this kind of collaborative situation. So.
And I'm just thinking, we're working with Tomas Saraceno currently, and he wanted us to work with thermal inks, which we've experimented with. And so we test them, and we put them out in the light, and we see how they're going to work, and they don't work. I mean, they're gone in a month or 6 weeks. And Saraceno says, I don't care. I want to do it anyway. And I say, no, I can't let that leave the studio. So, you know, it's a give and take, and not all things are possible, but I look forward to those students and their suggestions. They often come up with great ideas about how to solve a problem.
Okay. Has it ever happened that an artist has given some good ideas to a printmaker, and then he's making the print afterwards for himself and signing it?
Oh, I'm sure.
You're sure?
I don't know
But
an
you
example
haven't
of-
documented it?
No.
Okay, well, we'll be waiting for that day, because that's partly what this seminar is about, you know, the relevance of the printer, the printmaking process and everything. Okay, are there other questions on this? Sure, would you come with, oh, you got it, sorry.
Marius Johnson, student printing department. Margaret mentioned it shortly, but the last week we've seen a lot of work that it has a fairly low number of editions.
Yes.
Now that we move on to a new era of printmaking, is the edition irrelevant, or?
I think the edition is very relevant still. And while I picked watershed projects that often, and some were unique, I still strongly believe that the edition is absolutely appropriate for certain projects. We don't usually make more than 30, 50 sort of our max. I say that, and then with Ed Ruscha, we just did this 4-edge book, and it's 250. So there are certainly exceptions.
Okay. Other questions from the wonderful group here today?
Hi.
Okay, there you go. Say your name.
Martin Kolsrud. Jeg er student. I have a question for Andrew. Because you started your presentation by saying why do you do it? Or the old technique. Yeah. Because I've also been like often confronted with the question why do you do it? I conclude with that I really like the things like makes me do art. So is it necessary to question this like this love for what you do?
I think it is necessary to ask the question, because I think if printmaking, and especially certain kinds of printmaking, is going to stay alive and not just be a kind of demonstration or a re-performance of the past. We have to really figure out, and it's not always, I think just asking the question doesn't mean that we necessarily are going to have a definitive answer because we're talking about art. But I think really making sure we ask that question has to be done. And I'm going to teach an elective in engraving next spring with my students. And I know that that's going to be part of what our discussion is going to be, along with the technique, to really think about why why any particular person would choose to do these things. And I'm very, I think about artists who do mezzotint. I think even about I think Sarah touched on the letterpress revival. And when I was in grad school, there were so many letterpresses being thrown away.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that there would be such a compelling reason to do letterpress again? So the other thing I think is about printmaking is it is a repository for reviving the obsolete. So once graphic design gets rid of the equipment, Printed Matter was talking about the risograph. And I remember going to the editions fair and seeing some of my former students so excited that they'd just done this thing with the risograph. So it's interesting to see how at different times things become compelling.
Were you satisfied with the answer? Yes?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, would somebody go with a microphone there, please? State your name first, please.
Hello, I'm Nina Beckman. Thanks for a great morning. I have another question for Margaret about editions. You say you think they are relevant. I just would like to hear you elaborate a bit more on why you think they're relevant.
Well, for example, there are the Christian Markley action prints that I showed you. Now, we're spending a great deal of time out on the loading dock where he's painting the backgrounds for those, and then we actually make a model that he can look at as he's making his marks. And then we screen print over that, sometimes multiple times. That you cannot edition that. It's unique because of the monoprint or the painted background. Other times we've made etchings, and actually sometimes he's hand-painted a model, and then we've reproduced that in a print medium, and we can edition it. So I think just to give people broader access to Christian Markley's work, I think it's important to do editions. For example, I don't want to get too far into the market. Do you find that vulgar to talk about the market? I think some of you do. But the smaller prints of Christian Markley you can buy for $1,500, $2,000. Okay, that action print, those are on the market at $75,000, which I might tell you helps the studio tremendously to move forward with other research projects. So I like things that can do well in the market. Of course, we're getting a fraction of the list price. Only 20% of the list price comes back to the studio. And our model, by the way, is we pay all the expenses of the artist in residence, all of their travel, their housing while they're there, all of the materials for their work. They're there for usually a week at a time to 10 days. And then we put it into the market. And we go to the art fairs. We participate in the IFPDA print fair that you saw in Sarah's, and we give the artist 50% of receipts. So obviously, we're offering multiples, multiple originals in the market. And I think the other dealers buy them and collectors buy them. So it just gives more access to the work. So I think it's very important for that reason to do editions.
Thanks a lot. Because I was also curious if you think there are circumstances where you say you do often pretty small editions, but in maybe some projects it might be relevant to not have it sort of numbered or even signed. I'm thinking of Sister Corita Kent.
Are you asking me, do I think sometimes there should be open editions?
Yeah.
Well, we did some wallpaper with Trenton Doyle Hancock that was a completely open edition. And I had to actually reprint 3 times. It was so popular. It's a 3D, with the 3D glasses, it has a 3-dimensional effect. And it was bought by institutions as well as individuals. And I think there the concept fit with the idea of an open edition. On the other hand, there's a tremendous cost associated with making large editions that are hand printed. And so you tend to reduce the number. Also, the fewer there are, the better the price.
Okay. Shall we continue then if there are no more? Okay, one more here. It's all right.
Yes, my name is Theodore Bart. I work here. I was kind of caught by the idea of your work, Margaret, as a kind of parallel production to the artistic work that takes place in the workshop. And also while you were talking, I was ensnared actually by your talk. You started out with Rauschenberg, then we get Rosenquist, Robert, Mapplethorpe, Roy, Lichtenstein, all these R's, you know, like in theory you would have Bourdieu, Baudrillard, Barthes, etc. But here we had a bunch of R's. And then we went over to Baker, Bert, Barr. We go to C's, the cyanotypes. Christian Markley, manga comics. Christian Markley makes cyanotypes. By that time, they had become cyanotapes in my mind. And this kind of synesthesia that is really, really quite effective in terms of creating an imprint through language and image. I'm just wondering, when you work in your workshop, do you occasionally have to act as a snake charmer? You know, that in some sense that the suggestions that you make are very, very skillfully made, and that this is part of your profession. And when you come to the chip, I start thinking about the signature in the sense of Giorgio Agamben, who has had this idea that the signature is a sign within the sign, and he compares it to the lute. When you start playing the lute, then the entire work is revealed, but in a different way. I guess my question to you is this coexistence of signatures at two levels of the work, tailing onto what I think Holger has been driving at. Does that kind of make sense, or?
Well, I think it goes back to the collaborative studio. This is a very, when do the collaborative studios really start? In the
States?
Yeah, like in the late 50s?
Late 50s.
Late 50s, and we have this renaissance of printmaking in the United States, and I started out with that with women like June Wayne and Titania Grossman, who founded ULAE, and they really established this notion of this collaborative studio in which the printmaker artisan, and I have to say the director too, create this environment. You know, there is a curatorial process that I'm engaged in terms of the artists that are invited to come to the studio, and I hoped you could see there wasn't a single style or a particular kind of practice that interests me, but try to bring a broad array of projects. And the other is, this is on a university campus. I care a great deal about how the artists that we bring in are meaningful to the students that we have on the campus. And the studio is open for students to come in, not to work, although we solve a lot of problems for them, gladly, the technicians, but to meet the artists and engage in a discussion with them. And then, remember, I'm also the director of the museum, so I try to put the artwork into some historical or contemporary context, not necessarily the work that's produced at the studio, but the work by those artists. That, as a matter of fact, I did a show called Audio Files with sound artists, and that was the first meeting with Christian Markley, who then said, I have this project I'd like to do at Graphic Studio. And that's how we started a relationship with him in 2006, but it actually started with an exhibition. So it's this whole environment that's collaborative, you know, from the curator to the artisan, that all makes this environment where artists can be experimental and productive, and I hope transgressive.
Okay, then I think we should go on to another topic that is very central to the seminar, and especially with you wonderful people here. And that is the topic of crafts. Now, to my mind, after the Documenta 13, you know, I think the grip, the total grip of the, shall we say, conceptual way of thinking has been a little bit slacked off. So there were other trends, other things where, you know, the making, the media, again, was in focus. And as you've shown in your lectures today, there are lots of people working with materials in different ways, etc. So are we going back to maybe another way of thinking? Now, if you take this seminar seriously, excuse me, there's a bit a consumeristic way of thinking, but if you listen to the applause, there were 2 great applause for the whole seminar. I mean, everything was good. Andrew, he got #1. And we had Nina Bundesson, are you here? She was #2. If you'd listen to the sound and the length and the intensity, 1, 2, and the rest was #3, so you're okay, all right. So the idea is that maybe people are responding towards this way of thinking. That's my idea and my questioning. Have you noticed, Sarah, for instance, and you also, Andrew, and your way of where you work, that there is a renewed interest in the hand-on kind of thinking and working?
I'm not sure I would say that that ever went away. I think that if you look at the covers of Art Forum, you might think that there was only a conceptual mode of production, that people weren't thinking about making or the hand. But when you talk to artists and you look really broadly at what's happening, I think making has always been an important part of the conversation.
Also in the theoretical field.
Yeah. I think that's true. I mean, I think what's funny is, in our effort to constantly rediscover, and this is something that I think happens, there is this kind of, I see like a fetishization of the 1960s that I hope is finally coming to an end. I don't know if people agree with me, but like enough already. But a constant need to go back and rediscover, and it's for lots of reasons. The scarcity of material, the market demands new fodder. And so you do start to see figures being brought into the conversation who were formerly excluded and pushed to the margins. I'm thinking of someone like Mrinalini Mukherjee, who's, she died last year, sadly, an Indian sculptor who worked primarily with hemp. And for a long time, she was discussed as a textile artist, not as a sculptor, and that was a craft-based activity. There's a lot of other things that get built into that, a whole neo-colonialist discourse as an artist in Delhi who was being shown in Bristol and London, but now the work is being understood as sculpture. So I think it's coming perhaps more to the critical fore and the theoretical fore as people go back and need to rediscover, to bring new material into dialogue, but I don't think it ever actually left.
Okay. Andrew, what is your opinion on these questions?
I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, one thought, of course, is that no matter how perfect the graphic studio prints look, they're so unbelievably crafted, and those pieces of paper have been touched so many times to get to that thing. You know, they're miracles. Okay. And I do think the work of the workshops has raised the bar for everybody who's making a print. You know, I look at Stanley William Hayter's prints, and we have one at the Rijksmuseum, I know, and it has fingerprints on the margins. And the curator bought it in 1947 when it was new. So everybody thought it was fine. Oh, no. You know, nobody thinks it's cute to have fingerprints on the margins if you're going to put your prints out in the world now, because of, I think, that standard of craft.
Yeah.
And then from the other end, of course, I spend a lot of my time dealing with 19-year-olds. And, you know, I have a drawing class where we make our ink out of oak galls and draw with quill pens and do silver point and make chalks and things. And I'm always kind of surprised, but there's never any resistance to it. There's just this kind of eagerness to learn these things. And because I think, you know, being in an art school where part of the whole ethos is a kind of freedom, I know that they're not going to get bogged down by those things, but they'll actually find ways to use them that will surprise me. So I'm pretty, I think you know, it's just the way artists use those things.
If I could just make one comment about that.
Yeah.
I think as experimental as some of the projects are, and even back to conceptual art, it was all about how it was crafted, how it delivers the idea. And you can't do it with sloppy technique or no technique. Even if you order up something from a shop, you want it to be perfectly fabricated. And I do have to do that now. We did these project with Teresita Fernandez with water jet cutters, which I saw you have here at your school. And we have to farm that out and find somebody that will have that value of craftsmanship to execute that cut at a level for an artwork, which would not be necessarily what that artisan or that man would do, that metal cutter would do for another kind of commercial project.
Well, these are pretty decisive questions we are touching now. I remember the first videos when they showed up. They had to be bad as not to be, you know, connected with professional film stuff, you know? But
Yeah,
that has changed dramatically over the years. Luckily, because they were very boring the first years of a video here in Scandinavia, anyway. But what are your opinions about this? I mean, the problems if you get too crafty.
But is it really that relevant to printmaking? Because I know that there's anxiety about this in ceramics and glass, furniture making.
Okay.
But I don't really see that it's that much of a printmaking issue.
All right. Could you explain that a little bit more? I mean, I'm
Well,
just
because
an art historian.
First of all, I think that a lot of what we would consider the fine crafting of prints is actually ultimately gets hidden. It's not foregrounded because it's just what makes the art reveal itself.
Yeah.
And I think that we sort of look through it. So we have that possibility. I mean,
But I would add that I do believe it's the artisan printmaker, the craftsman, that it contributes to the success of the artwork. You know, Eva could not make the plate that she made a drawing, they made the plate, they printed the plate, and then she collaged it onto the sculpture. But she couldn't actually execute the quality. She couldn't print a plate the way my top printers can print.
right.
And you would think, you know, think of Picasso. All of you curators know this. We value Chromolink. We know that the people who are connoisseurs of prints recognize that Picasso's top printer was Chromolink. And we know there's a sort of quality to the print that for those who are able to observe that and understand that value. So the craftsmanship is absolutely, I would argue, critical to the printmaking process. Even if the artists themselves don't have that craft, the printer artisan must have it to make a successful collaborative project.
Well, do you have a comment to that? This is a very normal notion, I think.
Well, I print all my own editions.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let anybody touch my copper plates. But I'm not that good at printing other people's things.
No.
But I have found a way
Yeah.
to do my own things.
Right.
You know, and I think I do it the very best.
Yeah.
And I like doing it. But, you know, I rely on, when I'm ready to do an edition, I call up Twin Rocker and talk to the paper maker. And he sends me a sheet, and I print on it, and I say, I'm getting some white spots. He sends me a sheet with less sizing. You know, it's those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I think that's always embedded in projects, like making those choices and figuring those things out.
Okay.
Paper choice is a huge issue.
Well, it's a major discipline, you
It
might
is.
say. And so yesterday we had an artist working with, you know, a tree paper made from trees, but you have many different traditions, the Japanese, etc. So it's an art, you might say, just making paper. In Japan, certainly they have special artists just doing paper.
At the Brodsky at Rutgers, that's one of the processes that they are extremely good at is paper making.
Yeah.
And so artists have come in to collaborate just with the paper maker, like Linda Banglis working to make paper sculptures out of pulp.
Okay. Any questions from the audience here about this? We have one. And just say your name, please, first.
Michael Kirk. Where I work, health and safety is a huge factor.
Could you speak up a little bit, please?
Health and safety is a huge factor. And I noticed you started off with the Rauschenberg cyanotypes, and we're watching Christian Markley play in this pool of blue, or in this room. I noticed there were some projects where everyone was wearing masks. You work at a state university, all right?
Yes.
I work under rules of EPA, constantly being told, no, maybe, no, and sustainability, and where does the waste go? And I think in many ways, the idea of total freedom in part has, you know, when someone asks me, can I do that? Well, not here, but maybe someplace else. How much, and I'm watching Andrew make plates, and I know I've been exploring the idea of an all-green applique for transfer onto plates. I know how toxic pigment can be. So I'm wondering, is your practices, your ability to make things, being affected by that, or is it becoming a factor as we talk about the expanded field? So that's just my question.
So good question.
Well, I'm going to use whatever I need to make my work. And then I'm going to wear a respirator or whatever I have to do. So Scott has helped me to figure out how to get that engraving onto the plate. It involves using number 7 litho varnish. Now we're getting to be a technique-y thing. And Paul told me about this stuff called potter's tar. We found out it's this pitch pine called Stockholm tar. And then Larry told me that I needed some lead tetroxide in there as a flexing agent. And we got to use it. It's the secret ingredient. So we do use it. I think it's actually important, even as we train our students, to train them to actually really use the methods that are being used out there safely, rather than sort of empty it out and have them just not be using the things that they need to learn.
Should they be forbidden? Is that what you think?
No, you know, the question, should you go to water-based inks, et cetera?
Yeah, Chinese, Japanese tradition. Yeah.
I will say in China, they were using kerosene to clean their plates. We wouldn't do that. Do I get in trouble with the fire marshal? Sometimes. Do the safety people come by and worry where we've got our hazardous chemicals? Yes. But the worst thing we've done is clog up the entire plumbing in the building, washing out plates. But now we have a good filter system for that. Yes, we're very safety conscious, and sometimes the printers, when they're working with certain inks, and actually on the Ruchet 4-edge books, it's a lacquer that they're spraying. They dress in an entire suit, a paper suit with a respirator, in a very specific space. And I guess one of the most caustic things for us is the silkscreen process. And I wish I had my own studio for that because of the fumes. So yes, we're very conscious of the safety issues, but we try not to let that limit what we might do. We just find a way to do it in a way that doesn't harm the artist or the printers.
I mean, I think one of the most important safety issues has to do with repetitive motion. You know, use those giant rollers.
Oh, yeah.
For me, sitting up straight while I'm engraving. Remembering that we do art with our bodies as well as with our minds and our eyes, and sort of thinking about how we're treating our bodies, and having those mats on the floor so we're not on those cement floors, and all those things that I think are extremely important for a lifetime of work.
You can really get great workout.
If you do it right.
Okay, but I would think maybe in a studio, you know, where you have different professional people together, that it's a better place for discussing, let's say, environmental problems, you know, and general things. So my idea of a real print studio would be with a lot of people coming in giving their opinions and coming with advice, you know. Theoreticians as well. Okay.
I'm Theodore Bart. I want to address a question to Andrew, whether the environmental issues that we're discussing at this point might be sort of part of a broader question of the quality of reflection in artistic practice, and that when we're discussing the necessity to rewrite the history of graphics, for me it's interesting to see that the form of the result and the form of your process are kind of very pervasively interlinked. You talk about body postures, but the entire process contains a narrative of making that kind of opposes the commercial society that you want to critique, and establishing a kind of different prehistory or contesting prehistory of what, you know, the society of which you're critical somehow. So for me, it's kind of as though, especially in the garden cycle, and your mother, I mean the 12 plates from your work, Your Mother's Garden, kind of is the epitome of that, because the form of the process kind of projected directly into the results somehow. And so I was wondering about that idea of reproduction and reflection in artwork is a kind of proposal for a different way of understanding and telling about printing practices, as it were, not necessarily through speech, but actually through the work process itself.
Well, I certainly see a parallel between making that garden and working on those plates, and the kind of growth of the project and the cycle that I go through every year to develop that garden. I have thought, though, about your question to the panel before on the alternative history of prints. And because I spend a lot of time working in museums, and of course you do, and I think you know and you do, I mean, and you know as you go through those boxes, the most amazing thing is to pick out a box. And you look at it, and there might be a Rauschenberg in there, but there are probably so many artists that you've just heard of or barely know, and those works still have so much to say. And I do think that alternative history is about that 99%.
That's a good point.
You know, those artists who are not famous, and I think it's something that happens working in museums. I work at the RISD Museum, and as a faculty member, and I've gone through all the boxes, and I did inventory twice when we moved. And it was just to look at that panoply of artists, you could never get to the bottom of it. You could never know them all, which is a wonderful arena of knowledge. And I think that print that hangs over my bed that speaks to me. He didn't know in 1630 when he made it that somebody was actually going to be so inspired by it in Providence, Rhode Island, which he probably didn't even know existed. So, I don't know. I think that's, you know, in response to one of your earlier questions.
Yeah, you know, when you described your relation to prints, old prints especially, as an art historian, I felt immediately, you know, we're on the same level there. You know, we are just, Callot, Jacques Callot is one of my favorites. You know, he uses the line in such a brilliant way. Probably as you like as well. But the difference is that, you know, we're just standing there with an awe, and there's an oh, wow, how is it possible? And we write books and die-to-die and essays. But I mean, you are making an imprint. You are doing something about what you see and what you enjoy and what you really, so.
But working for 8 years with Emily Peters and Jan Howard at the RISD Museum was like a tutorial to get a master's degree, to see their insights and to see Jan's professionalism and just identifying certain things about contemporary art and photography, and then to see how that PhD training that Emily has is applied to real things, but then it's able to be used to pick apart ideas. And then I feel that as an artist, I have a contribution to make to the history of prints. And that's what I think I think when we think about the art world, so often we think about it as a pyramid, where some people are on top and they feel good, and then the people in the lower parts of the pyramid feel sort of oppressed. And I think that's a terrible way to think about it. I think we have to think about it as a kind of ecosystem, especially when we're in a part of the art world that's so fragile like prints.
Yeah.
You know, where we're not part of the giant stratified power structure of giant galleries and all that stuff. We're really trying to do something with those 99% things to reinterpret them for the world and keep them going and to keep new art coming out, to make art available to people who can't go to Christie's and put up that paddle, but really would love to have something.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at his museums all over the world, I mean, the print collections, they count, you know, tens and 100,000s, you know, while the paintings are few and way up there, you know. So there is a collective dimension in print that I like a lot, that you just mentioned here, and many graphic artists and printers, they've been, you know, heavily into this. So we had talked a little bit about it yesterday, you know, we had part of the thing. But the question is, I would like to ask you, if you have, I mean, so strong feelings, let's say, for refinement, you know, in what you do, like your wonderful objects that we just passed around, I see you had a very limited edition. Why don't you want to beautify America?
Well, because I mean, to get to the economic thing, I'm paying for that myself out of my salary. Like, I save money to do that, and that's about the limit that I can afford. I mean, it's going out on a limb. But the other thing is, as I've said a couple times, 100 pieces of paper is about this big, but 100 objects fill 10 boxes. And so there's this, it's been a fascinating expansion of scale in so many ways.
Yeah.
I think 100 is a lot.
I do too.
And who knows what could happen? I mean, I would love to have the opportunity, if I had the freedom, to work with industrial production, maybe.
Yeah.
As long as nobody was, but I don't want anybody telling me what to do. So
Excuse me?
I don't want anybody telling me what to do. Which is what I love about my powder friend.
Yeah.
He says, okay, go ahead. He knows it's not going to happen, or that maybe it will happen, or it may take a year longer than I thought it would. But.
Okay. Well, you know, production routines change, and I think this will be possible in your time. You're a lot younger than I am. So I think you should just look ahead and change America. Why not? Go for it. What did the Americans say? In it to win it. That's the idea there. But, okay, do you have opinions on this, you know, how to reach a broader audience, public, with art, you know? The print has a special role, or how do you look upon this? Or the way of thinking print, you know, it is, as we've said, it's very close to a collective way of producing and thinking. Is there hope for America? I mean...
I missed the Republican debate, so I can't say. I missed that second debate, so I'm not completely able to say, but...
I mean, the
I'm
question
not sure
is
quite
like
where
this.
to start with your question.
Will you just have small enclaves of connoisseurship and interesting artistic productions going on, and that's about it? You know, that's about reality now, you know? Or is there a possibility like the real American art movement, pop art, you know? They try to expand dimensions. Maybe some say it's vulgar, but I mean, it's an interesting experiment. And how far did they reach, you know? Well, they would reach Norway, certainly, but...
But I mean, think about the ongoing relevance of that imagery. I mean, Andy Warhol is probably one of the best known artists now in the world. So I think, I mean, the democratic possibilities of printmaking, it's something I briefly touched on, but I think it's built into the DNA. You know, the possibility of multiplicity, the possibility of reproduction. You know, it offers it has the potential for incredible things in the world.
Yeah.
And very often when artists do different kinds of public projects, whether it's a broadside for a city bus or some sort of kind of insertion in a newspaper, it takes a printed form.
Yeah.
So.
Maybe it would be interesting if you described the Museum of Modern Art's, how the print department is not now so isolated that prints are moving into exhibitions more broadly, and you're bringing other kinds of work into the print space.
Do you like that?
I love it.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay. Just so I know what kind of ground I'm on before I start.
We do know it's a lot of work.
So what Margaret's referring to is the fact that the Museum of Modern Art was founded in 1929. And from its very beginning, it's always had medium-specific, we call them now silos. You know how certain terms just kind of find their way into the dialogue and suddenly you say it all the time? Deep dive about the silos. You could do like a whole... Anyway, so these medium-specific silos have existed since 1929. There's one for painting and sculpture. There was one for photography, one for film. Alfred Barr always wanted to have one for television, but he never was able to do that. Wouldn't that have been radical? Even now, it would be amazing and radical. And something that I think is happening now, which is the result of a new generation of curators and leaders in the museum, is a recognition that while the silos serve a certain kind of purpose, for one, they allow multiple people to be the boss. There's a boss of painting and sculpture and a boss of photography. You can have multiple bosses. The great downside to that is it doesn't acknowledge the way most artists actually work, which is not in a siloed fashion. I just did an exhibition on a short period in the career of the artist Jean Dubuffet when he essentially invents assemblage. The exhibition included his illustrated books. It included prints, drawings, sculpture, and painting. And the story that I tried to tell in that exhibition was, in fact, what led that charge, the creation of assemblage, was, in fact, the experiments that he was doing in the print shop. He was making these lithographs, cutting them up, reassembling them, printing them again as these seamless compositions. And he realized in this way he could create these things that looked as though they had kind of sprung up fully formed. And it's that lends itself next to sculpture and to his tableau d'assemblage, to his paintings also. So this willingness to let go of this siloed structure means that now when we're showing a Kirchner painting, we may be showing alongside that Kirchner painting the first Brücke portfolio. So rather than leaving the suite of chronological galleries and going downstairs to a print gallery where you might see German expressionist prints in all of their glory, you're able to see them in a better, more full context that allows you to see the kind of multifaceted activities of those artists in that moment. And it's something that we're really driving towards. In every iteration of those gallery installations, we're really trying to stay a little bit more true to the way that we understand artists to practice, while also making sure that all of the mediums are represented.
And I think that speaks to your question about how are prints disseminated. And they, instead of, I think people would skip the print department and not go into those galleries, but now the prints are put right out next to a painting or a sculpture or show the more full scope of an artist's practice.
The reason, Margaret, I asked if you like that or not is because there's been a lot of anxiety. I've heard from a lot of people who are worried that this kind of exhibition-related integration means that we're going to abandon or neglect the print collection. And I have to reassure people that that really isn't the case. And in fact, prints are more prominent now at MoMA than they've ever been before.
So. That's the best I've heard in a long time.
Yes,
Could you repeat that?
Which part?
The prints are.
The prints are.
The print department is not threatened.
No.
Well,
not
in
at
Norway,
all.
they have, the print department stopped. Where is Mayfrid? Is she here? Yeah, when did it stop? In the normal way. It's functioning still, I know, but it's not in the old way, huh? 10 years ago, yeah. Then it was part of, they had no special committee buying, so it's...
But you are buying.
We are buying at some people would say, a kind of frightening rate. And in fact, the Department for Prints and Drawings has more endowed funds than any other curatorial department at the museum.
Yeah.
So our potential to continue collecting at the rate which we have historically is tremendous. Yeah.
Wow, that we have a.
So keep making prints.
Yeah. Okay, no, but I mean, this is, there are some people, now there are loads of people. Okay, come on, get on. You have a microphone? Say your name.
I already have it. I'm Lynn Svensson. I'm from the graphics department, of course, second year. And I have a question about, you've been shown around this school, and this school is actually 6 schools beaten into one. So I think it's very fitting for a seminar of printing in the expanded field. Do you have any recommendations of how to use this opportunity we students have in this school that is rather special?
What was the question?
Could you repeat speak a little bit louder? I'm
Oh,
so
sorry.
old.
This school is 6 schools into one and represents a lot of different departments. And being a seminar about graphics in the expanded field, I think that being shown around these schools, do you have anything to recommend to us as students to...
Yeah.
Well, you mean, how did we respond to the absolutely amazing facility that you have, that no other school in the world has this set up? And if you can't make great art here, I think what was missing is, have you just started up the term? Because there wasn't much to see. There wasn't any work on display. So it's hard to make a recommendation having seen. Would I like to see the work that you're producing? Yes, very much. But there wasn't that opportunity. So all I can do is comment to you that if you don't know it, you have the most amazing facility for your practice.
I think Jan would like to say something. Yeah?
That's your
we
time.
Have 5, is that all?
Yeah.
Oh, this is so interesting. But just to, just to answer you, I think Jan's policy is to try to collaborate with the other departments. You're doing something with ceramics, you know, in your field of...
and I heard Victoria talking about...
Yeah, and so I think that would be an important way of opening up, sort of, towards the academy, towards the Scenefagen, all these things will be interesting. And that's the exciting melting pot.
Yeah, don't exist in silos.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Silos are bad.
Don't stick to your press. Okay.
Is there another?
Okay, one more question then. Yeah. Good. Say your name.
Hi, good morning. I'm Margarita González. I'm coming from Spain. I'm a publisher. And so my question regarding silos and this tendency of opening the gates could be related to the market, since art market is important for publishing, big time. And I would like to know your ideas on the tendency of having specialized art fairs for prints, or the role of prints or contemporary printmaking or print projects in contemporary art fairs. Thinking on the situation on Frieze, Art Basel, Miami, Art Basel, Basel. So I would like if you could share your thoughts of that.
This is a very interesting debate that goes on regularly in my studio, particularly the salesperson. We participate in the International Fine Art Print Dealers Association, IFPDA. And to be a member of that, there's this big show that opens in November, as Sarah mentioned, with print dealers and publishers showing together. We then repeat that in other cities. During Art Basel Miami, we have a print fair that's in a hotel on Collins Avenue. On the other hand, many of the publishers are now going into the main fair if they can get in. Of course, the cost is tremendous to participate there, or are wanting to have their prints shown in the broader context. You know, there's 16 or 18 parallel fairs during Art Basel, so you could go into Art Miami or Scope or one of the other fairs. And I would say many of the publishers and print dealers want